Good afternoon and welcome to We Believe Digital News Break. We're really glad you're joining us today. We're broadcasting live from downtown Jackson, Mississippi, in the heart of the Deep South, just hitting 90 degrees, projected to head on up to 94 degrees today, and then maybe some showers in the afternoon, just like yesterday. But we're glad you're here. We got a lot of items to share with you, both from the local level, the Mississippi state level, the national level, and global issues as well. So, but before we get started, let me give you this call-in line. We'll be happy to have you join us in the discussion, and that number is 1-800-492-5186. Hope you save that to your phone so you can call in easily when things come up in the future. Also, we believe is available on Facebook, and we ask you to follow us on Facebook and like us on Facebook, as well as Instagram and Twitter. And we have Roku TV under We Believe Global Roku TV. So please join the family. We're a growing studio here in Jackson, and we're just going to try to deliver you the news and do it in a slightly different way, where we give you just a little bit deeper than the typical newscasts will do. And hopefully that provides a service, to the community and keep people informed, especially about the issues that involve us here in Jackson, in a predominantly black, 85% black city. And oftentimes, it just seems like black people are invisible. Can you imagine an 85% black city, but in so many ways it appears that black people are absolutely invisible to the governments here. So I want to welcome in my co-host, Mr. Socrates Garrett. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing extremely well, Chris. It's always good to be in the studio with you.
Mm-hmm. Same here. It's always the best show when both of us can make it. That's kind of the way I got it in my head. I hope the listeners agree with that.
Well, I thought you did an awesome job, and you carried the show, and I watched it, and I thought it was very fine production, and you got out a lot of good information that people need to know.
Well, I got big shoes to fill trying to sit alongside you, so thank you. Let's start out with it's been now over 2 years since George Floyd's murder, Mr. Garrett, and last week they sentenced Thomas Lane. He was the officer that was holding George Feet's legs down while what's his name put the kneeled on his neck, and they sentenced him to 30 months. And later on this afternoon, they're expected to sentence. They've already been found guilty, but they're expected to sentence the other two officers that were involved and did nothing while they murdered George Floyd it was 2 years ago, May. And their names are Alexander Kuning and Tao Tay, if I'm pronouncing that right. So that sentencing is coming later this afternoon. Some kind of accountability.
Yeah, I mean, that was a tragedy, like Emmett Till, and there are other things that occur in our community that mobilize the entire nation. And the murder of George Floyd is one of those incidents that people of all goodwill and of all races came and said, this is ridiculous. Mm-hmm. This cannot happen in America. And we want to thank the young lady that had her phone out and was filming the incident, because we would have never known. But out of that, Black Lives Matter and a lot of other organizations were energized. Mm-hmm. I don't want to say they were formed, but they certainly were energized to the point that the entire country said no more. Mm-hmm. And we had riots in Houston and in Louisiana, all across this country. Mm-hmm. And we have judicial reform as a result of what happened to George Floyd. And so As tragedy as it is, his life was not in vain to the extent that we can correct some of the ills that are in this country, Chris.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and one of the things too, just to pluck out of there one more time, because our youth gets such a bad rap. There's very high expectations, and a lot of the youth, they just get a bad rap. But again, that was a teenage girl operating that cell phone that day and caught that whole thing, and we'd have missed another injustice, would have occurred for the lack of that teenage girl. So we're all about trying to promote, support, encourage the youth, and we're going to get where we need to get. Shifting over again on a national story. A couple days ago, President Joe Biden sent a pre-recorded message to the National Organization for Black Law Enforcement Executives. And, his message was that the former president, Donald Trump, lacked courage. He said he didn't have the courage to act on January 6th. And he went on to say that you can't be pro-insurrection and pro-cop at the same time. You can't be pro-insurrection and pro-democracy at the same time. You can't be pro-insurrection and pro-American all at the same time. So it seemed like different factions are trying to have this both ways. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I don't know what President Biden meant by he didn't have the courage. I think Trump probably has demonstrated that he has more courage than he has sense.
Okay.
And so, to the extent that it wasn't a lack of courage, it was a plan that he orchestrated,
right,
that he was seeing carried out. His speech to the crowd before they marched over to D.C. to scale the wall was a motivational pep
Absolutely.
talk.
Spin them up.
He got them all fired up, and then they didn't allow him to attend. I think it was his intentions to even attend that rally, Chris. So I think that America is so divided. This nation is divided. Trump thinks he won the presidency in his mind. And there are a tremendous amount of followers out there that follow his leadership. And so we just have a divided nation. So I hope that the president will continue to speak to it in a manner that resonates with Joe, the average Joe out there that's potential a wall scaler,
right,
or a mass shooter,
right,
or to address the hate that's in America in various groups. I mean, it is more prominent in various groups, age brackets, than it is others. So I think the president needs to do more.
Yeah, I hope he will. We'll see.
And when did the vice president say anything?
Right. I don't know. Did he? I don't think he ever made any comments on that day.
Yeah. No, I'm talking about Vice President Kamala Harris. I mean, when is she going to speak to the issue?
Oh, okay.
I mean, as a black person, we would hope that your voice would be reigning over the entire environment about issues of social justice.
Right.
I mean, that's what we expect and want from her position. Chris, I'm concerned that when we put black leadership in place, that we don't receive the benefits from having put them in place in a measure that we expect and need. And so Kamala Harris, Vice President, needs to be heard more. I haven't heard enough from her.
Right. She is. I've seen different reports, her moving around the country, making different speeches and everything. But it seemed like they have been a little bit light on that issue, almost sort of like, well, we're going to leave it up to the January 6th committee. We're going to leave it up to the Attorney General, Department of Justice, and all that. And but I think you're right. You always need to hear from the people at the top.
And especially African Americans. We have a greater responsibility to deal with issues that affect us more than any other race should have. You know, I appreciate you so much, Chris, because you're not African American, but you speak to the ills of social justices in this state and across the country, and your voice that is resounding out there where African American leadership is silent.
Thank you. You know, and I'm just thinking too, just briefly, does that say, I can't?
You're good.
You know, the summer recess, all these legislators up in D.C., and of course they're getting ready for their recesses. They're getting ready for their summer recesses. In the House, they're on a recess from July 29th to September 5th, so almost a 6-week recess. Now, how about that? You know, and then of course Senator McConnell must have heard about that, so he's delaying the recess for the Senate for 2 weeks, so they don't go on recess from till August 11th to September 5th. So I think he wants to kind of make it seem like the Senate is going to be more devoted to their work, you know, than the House is.
Well, as a businessman, I can't get a recess. I can't stop for 6 weeks and say, hey, you know, I'm going to go on vacation for 6 weeks. And the average citizen can't identify with that. No. I mean, the trouble that we're in today requires them to work overtime. Overtime.
Now they'll make the excuse that once they're back in their districts, they're going to be going out doing different events, town halls, whatever. But I'm not sure we always follow up on that to see if that's really happening or if it's a 6-week vacation or what, but you know, I'm always reminded these folks earn from the taxpayer, the basic congressman and senator, not the ones in the higher leadership positions, but just the ordinary run-of-the-mill, if you will. Their annual salary is $174,500 per year, and of course they have the cream of the crop medical plans that the average folks like you and me don't have access to. You know I go over to the Veterans Administration, and you know, I got to tell you, I can't always write home about what goes on over there, and yet these folks they have a whole separate plan for themselves. They really take good care of themselves, and of course we foot the bill.
Well, you know, there's something wrong with that. You know, they are supposed to be public servants. And as a servant, you're not supposed to just serve yourself.
Right.
And so the government is under tremendous challenge and pressure, and that's why America is divided. It's divided because of the differences in the results of our leadership. And if you can't show what you've accomplished, if you haven't made this world a better place, that's obvious, then you've failed.
You got to go.
You know, there was the old Negro spiritual that said, you know, let the work that I've done speak for me. You know, you don't have to say anything about me.
Right.
Let the work that I've done speak for me. And that's what our elected officials should do.
Right.
You know, if we can't see the work, then they didn't do anything.
They didn't do anything. Let's jump out to, there's a thing that I just really want to mention before we get into this stuff in Mississippi that maybe we'll get to before the break. But, you know, the Pope, Mr. Garrett, that Pope was up in Edmonton, Alberta, just in the last few days, might still be there. And the Pope did something very interesting up there. You know, they have this cesspool of sexual abuse that goes on in the Catholic Church. And then really just a couple of months ago, we found out that it goes on in the Southern Baptist Convention as well, where you got these pastors, clergy, church leadership, you know, that are taking advantage. You know, the parents, they bring their lambs to these church schools, to these churches. They're bringing their lambs there for leadership and direction, give them good education, Baptist education, Catholic education, whatever it happens to be. But then you have this ungodly cesspool of that people take advantage of children. You know, and I remember when that report came out, just a few years ago of up in Pennsylvania of over 300 clergy being involved in sexual abuse over about a 50-year period, Catholic clergy in Pennsylvania. And it was a bombshell. And I remember going to Mass in Norfolk, Virginia at absolutely a basilica, a black basilica, the only one in the state of Virginia. It was my home church for the last 10 years before I moved down here. And the white pastor there, what he told people was, there's just a few bad apples. It's not the church. There's just a few bad apples is what's causing this. But I just wanted to share with you that the Pope said the other day, he apologized profusely for the church's role in severing generations of indigenous families participating in Canada's school system. Quote, the church kneels before God in shame. Now, he didn't say the pastors. He said the church itself kneels before God in shame. And, you know, I think that's the first time that I've heard some level of ownership, you know, at the highest possible level, saying that, no, this isn't bad apples. This is the church as a system that's brought this on us. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not prepared to speak on that issue. It's a terrible thing when any child is abused in any organization, whether it's Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts or churches. Or it's just a terrible, terrible thing, Chris. And so it seems as if it's more widespread than we would have thought of. And you're right that, you know, the church needs to bow, the Boy Scouts needs to bow. Those organizations that have custody over the young need to be held to a higher standard. And it's certainly non-Christian like to have that happen under your watch, to be the individual that is exploiting children and families. That's terrible.
Terrible things. So we're getting ready to go to break here now. We want to remind you that you can always call in and join the conversation. The call-in number is 1-800-492-5186. 1-800-492-5186. And we hope you'll call us and join in the conversation. We'll just take a brief break now to hear from a couple of our wonderful sponsors. Stay right with us.
The Mississippi Link is an African-American female-owned newspaper with a trusted voice that is highly respected throughout the city, state, and nation. Our motto, keepers of the knowledge for people who speak the truth, since 1993. Link significantly influences the thoughts, attitudes, and buying decisions of its readers. Call us at 601-368-8481 for your advertising needs. If you would like to receive a newspaper in the mail each week, our annual subscription is only $52 per year. That is only $1 per week for you to stay informed regarding many stories that you can only get in the Mississippi Link. Sign up today at themississippi.com and click on Home Delivery.
And welcome back to We Believe Digital Newsbreak. We're glad that you're joining us. You know, Mr. Garrett, we're going to shift into the state of Mississippi with this god-awful TANF scandal that's going on. You know, yesterday there was a real a bombshell that was dropped, and that is that, you know, everybody's been focusing on this volleyball stadium, $5 million paid out of federal TANF funding that Mississippi had supposedly no accountability for. And and they used $5 million of that money, put together a $7.5 million volleyball stadium down there at University of Southern Mississippi. And now come to find out, they were not alone. There were other entities. Mississippi for $816,000. Belhaven University, $236,000. Delta State University had TANF funds somehow, some way, $563,000. So I just, this thing is just growing larger and larger and larger every day.
Chris, I think it would be good if we give our viewers some background on this scandal,
Sure.
how it occurred.
Well, every single year, the federal government gives every single state money under a program that's run out of the Department of Human Services, Office of Child Assistance, gives families this temporary assistance for needy families, it's called. It's been in place for decades now. And the main glitch to it is that there's no formal accountability. So, for example, when the federal government gives Mississippi, $77 million over a certain amount of time to serve the very neediest among us, they don't require any reporting or justification or anything like that. And so obviously what it certainly looks to be Republican governors, legislators over there, turned that funding for the neediest among us into a slush fund. And they just went, hog wild with it and just took care of their pet projects. And we have indictments on some people now. We have the football star Brett Favre, from Mississippi. He's supposedly paying back $1 million. Can you imagine $1 million for him speaking, a speaking fee? But anyway, supposedly he's paying that back. But it's just such a scandal. It's just so anti. It's just so fundamentally wrong to steal that money that's earmarked from the federal government for poor people and use it for their own devices.
Well, TANF funds in Mississippi are needed. We're the poorest state in the nation.
Poorest.
And we're the most unhealthy state in the nation. Mm-hmm. Issues on infant mortality rates and things of that nature require assistance to be provided to our citizens. Mm-hmm. And to use those funds in that way goes beyond criminal, because the folk that really needed those dollars are suffering the most.
That's right,
Chris.
That's right.
And yet Mississippi touts itself on being the most religious state in the Bible Belt.
Right.
And there are a lot of things going on in the state that just don't add up. Mm-hmm. We won't expand Medicaid for our citizens. We don't allow them to have the TANF funds that they need to survive. We initiate the laws to stop the abortion, but yet we have the highest number of people that are incarcerated in our jails. Mm-hmm. I don't get it, Chris. Is the state just backwards?
It is backwards. And, it just reminds me, just briefly, talking to this, this discussion I had with a white Methodist pastor some months ago. And he said, you gotta, because I said to him, how do they do this? How do they conduct themselves this way? This hatred of black people, this hatred of brown people and Indians as well, and this hatred of poor people, and still wear that gold cross around their neck. How do they do that? And he said to me, what we really got here is a bunch of unreconstructed Confederates. So what he's really saying is they just haven't changed. And he said, they drank the Kool-Aid of the mythology of the South. That there was much more to it than just slavery. with the Civil War. And, those words he said really resonate true with me, because it's an utter disregard. What I see day in and day out is an utter disregard for black people in general, other minorities, and especially the poor. Especially the poor. I don't know how a Christian lives with themselves when you're down in, the poor. How do you do that?
Well, it's difficult to reconcile. 40+% of the population in Mississippi is African American, and 45% of the population of Jackson lives below the poverty level. The second congressional district is the poorest congressional district in the country. And yet we won't expand Medicaid. No. We take the TANF dollars and use them for private slush fund, pet projects. And then we boast that we have the fewest number of people on welfare of any other state.
Well, they pride themselves on that.
How can that be? And how many people are on welfare in the state of Mississippi?
Well, on welfare. I was thinking of Medicaid, because there's about 750,000. Well, sometimes there's a line in there, but there's over 700,000 on Medicaid, on the regular Medicaid, without the Medicaid expansion. So that's leaving over 300,000, 300,000 to 350,000 left out in the cold by not expanding Medicaid. And you asked me yesterday, and I didn't have the number available, but just on the basic Medicaid that this state provides, the basic Medicaid, not because we don't do the expansion. For every $1 that Mississippi spends on Medicaid, they get $3.34 back from the federal government.
Wow.
And shock of all shocks, related to that, not exclusively, but related to that, I had it confirmed again before we came on the show today. There is no state in the country that gets more federal aid than Mississippi. The revenue from the feds that come into the Mississippi coffers each year represents 43% of the state revenue.
Wow. And I knew that the hypocrisy that we have here as a state to deny the expansion of Medicaid, saying we don't want those dollars because it was called Obamacare.
Right.
And yet 43% of the monies that we get it to float our economy comes from the federal government.
On the take.
Why don't we deny and say we don't want the 43%?
Yeah.
And it's the hypocrisy is just overwhelming, because if you take away that 43%, you would bankrupt the state of Mississippi within 30 days.
And yet the Republican leaders just implemented a tax cut to try. I mean, why would you mess with a dedicated revenue stream? Why would you do that? I mean, because come to find out, that tax cut benefits the wealthiest among us. It does nothing for working families. It does nothing for retirees. It does nothing for poor people. In fact, the reverse of that happens. They end up paying more when they go to the store, and especially when they go to the grocery store, they end up paying more.
Yeah, it would have been a much better decision to eliminate the grocery tax.
The grocery tax.
Would have been a much better fix for the state of Mississippi than state income tax.
I saw one reference where it showed that for wealthy families, and I forget what the actual cutoff was, but for wealthy families, it's going to be over a $6,000 annual savings for them with this tax, with this declining state tax. And for folks that are poor, it could amount to something in the neighborhood of less than $200.
Wow.
Versus $6,000.
And so we got to deal with Mississippi and Mississippi issues. Why? Because we live here, and we want to improve this place. We want to make this place better because we were here. And so we take the struggles, as unpopular as it may be, and we take the struggles because that's what we have to do. And so there are a lot of things that needs to change. And one of those things is the education system. The state of Mississippi has 8 universities, Chris.
Right.
8 universities. And we have fewer students in those 8 universities than they have at UCLA. And yet we have 8 campuses. And the reason we have 8 campuses is not so that we could make education more affordable and available to our states. It was created because of racism. And they wanted African Americans to go to school near the plantation so they could be back at work that afternoon.
Right.
So you have Mississippi Valley State that sits on top of Delta State, and you have Mississippi State University that sits on top of MUW. And you have all of this duplicity in the government and the way the state is run. And Chris, did you know that Mississippi, while we are the poorest state in the nation, our retirement benefit package for state employees and elected officials ranks right at the top of all states.
Amazing.
It's amazing.
And when you're talking about the education, too, I just remember yesterday we shared with the listeners that, a recent CNBC report. And so here you are mentioning the 8 universities here in Mississippi. We have these institutions of higher learning, a board. Now you know the demographics that are sitting on that board. And those are all appointees by the top 3 legislators here, the governor and the lieutenant governor and the speaker. And yet in a recent survey, they said that Mississippi is the second least educated workforce in the country. Second least educated.
And I believe you said it's the worst place to start a business.
They say they said that the court system notoriously hostile to business and that we have the least productive workforce.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's scary. But we're coming down on time here. Again, we really hope that you join our We Believe family. We have so many different programs we're broadcasting each week. We have sports and community interest. We have this news show 3 times a week, as close to the noon hour as we can. Mr. Garrett has lived here for decades, has an amazing perspective, as you can see, and he has his own show on Friday evenings at 7 p.m. We have a brand new health and habits show, and we have a daily prayer show every Tuesday and Thursday. We start our programming day with dedicated in prayer because we just believe that that's so important for all of us as we move forward. So we really want you to join the We Believe family and take a look at us through your Facebook page. Subscribe to our page on YouTube. And on Roku, We Believe Global on Roku, and we love to have you in the family. If you have any questions about the studio, we're also interested in finding new programming and new talent for the studio. So if you ever would like to talk to us about that, or maybe you have skills in studio production, camera work, etc., we're always open to talking to you. Give us a call, 1-800-492-5186. Thanks for joining us today. We hope you have a great day and stay safe out there.